All right, good afternoon, everybody. Happy Sunday. Hope you're all having a great weekend. Today's video, we're going to run through the weekly watch list. So let's jump right into it. First things first, let's cover the economic calendar for the week ahead. So last week, right, we had we had FOMC come out and pretty significant move off of FOMC. Right, we saw a massive breakdown Thursday, large gap down massive move down on Wednesday, large gap down into Thursday, and then Friday definitely saw a battle between the buyers and sellers at some key levels. So for this week, Tuesday we do have new home sales, and Wednesday durable good orders. So nothing huge there. Will definitely give us a little bit of volatility, but nothing major. And then on Thursday we have initial jobless claims. And then we do have some Fed speakers after the close there on Thursday. So potentially see some volatility due to that on Friday. And then Friday, the biggest day with PCE that comes out before the market open. So it's really the biggest thing that we have is Friday with the PCE. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right, shouldn't be huge moves. And then Friday, really keep an eye on the PCE index there. All right, so let's jump into it. Only looking at a few names this week, right? I don't think there's really not a whole lot of quality setups. But the first one I'm looking at is Tesla. Okay, now Tesla, I'm really paying attention to this 245 support. Okay, if we fail at 245, right, we ended up holding a higher low here on the 1st of September until we broke out there on that Friday of September 8th. This was that Monday where we saw that nice move. And, last week we failed to hold this back test of 260. 260 to 261, we failed there on Thursday, and then Friday saw a really weak breakdown under 250 and into this 245 support. So if Tesla fails to hold this 245 support, I do think we see 240. 240 can even come early tomorrow since we did close under 245 there on Friday. But 240 really is the next key support. And under 240, we really don't have much until another 10 points down into 230. So this range of 240, 245 is really the area that I'm going to keep a close eye on. Either for puts or for a bounce back up in 250. Potentially, we see another back test of 260. So keep an eye on 245. That is the single level that I'm looking for, whether it's an entry on calls or looking for an entry on puts. I would consider the same type of situation there at 240. So I would look for calls and for puts at 240. It just depends on price action, volume, right, and the whether or not there's any catalysts with Tesla this week. Okay, so keep an eye on 245 to 240, and we will find a trade off of that range. Now, Netflix is probably the main focus for me this week. Netflix has been selling off from 440 for about 2 weeks. We failed at 400 last week. Really didn't get many back tests there. I think we really only got one at the beginning of this week, and since then this thing has just been slowly grinding lower. So we're back into 380. 380 is a key support. Okay, it's a huge support for Netflix here. Under this 380 mark, the next key support ultimately is 369 to 370. So we have potentially 10 points of downside if this support fails. Now, 380 is an important level because it was the high of 2023 for the most part. All right, we made this high back in February of 2023, ended up pulling back, and hit a low of like 286 back in April. And since then, this thing has just been uptrending. But when we broke through 380, right, this ended up seeing a move all the way up into 480. Right, so we got basically a 100-point move once this 380 level broke. Okay, and we're right back into this area. Right, so this could potentially be, and keep in mind that when we broke through 380, it was a gap up above, and we never really got a back test of this key area. Right, so there's definitely a lot of orders that need to be filled at this 380 mark. So for this week, if we do hold 380, I like calls for a short-term bounce, mainly targeting 390 to 400, so potentially 10 to 20 points. But if Netflix does fail here, like I said, we do have about 10 points of downside. So this is a huge support. Definitely going to see a lot of interaction. And even looking at Netflix, intraday on Friday, we do see that break of 380, right? And then we ended up seeing a really nice move up into 382, pulled back, but we were able to hold that low going to close, and we closed at 379.81, so just right under 380. And if we take a look at SPY, notice how SPY closed at the lows, right? And QQQ also closed at the lows on Friday. But with Netflix here, we did see buyers step up below that low of Friday. So if I go long over 380 to start the week off, my risk is that low from Friday, 378.50. Okay, so really, really tight risk for, potentially, like I said, 10, potentially 20 points of upside. So really strong R&R here to the upside off of 380. But again, it's going to depend on if there's any catalysts on Netflix and the overall market environment. But really, really do like Netflix at this 380 mark. All right, and now Meta here. So Meta, pretty clearly defined downtrend. Right, we tested that on Friday as well, but we closed back under 300. So the game plan for Meta this week is if we hold under 300, right, and we break 298, then I like puts to the downside. But Meta was able to hold up really well on Friday, right? Closed green, closed up 1.13%. Meta did have a catalyst on Friday. So if this ends up reclaiming 300 early on in the week, then I like calls for a push up into 307, 305 to 307 again. And then over 307 will trigger a move up into 310, again, just depending on the overall market price action. But if we do get through 307 at some point with this week and we see SPY and the QQQs, try and form a base and bounce, then I like Meta for a push back up into 310. But early on in the week, if this doesn't reclaim 300 and we break under 298, then puts will be in play. But if we end up getting through 300, then I like calls, and the risk there would be 298. So potentially risking 2 points, right, for 5 or 7 points of upside. So really strong R&R here with this one as well. But again, if we fail 300, break 298 to the downside, then I would look for puts targeting 295 and then around like 292. So either way, whether it's to the downside or to the upside, we do have solid R&R, right? Because if we take puts under 298, we're looking at 300 as a risk. If we go long above 300, we're looking at 298 as a risk. Okay. All right. So Apple here, the biggest thing with Apple is we have a double inside weekly. Okay. And looking at the weekly, right? I mean, this thing is setting up for a breakdown, but Apple is one of the harder names to short. So for this week, my main focus is 173.50. Okay. Now, if we take a look at the daily, 173.50, right, is the bottom of this double inside week. All right. So if we fail at 173.50, obviously puts are going to be in play, right? Mainly targeting this low of August 18th, which is 172, and then 170. So with this one, it's decent R&R. Because if I take puts under 173.50, I'm risking 175. Okay, so it's about a 1-to-1 risk reward to start off if we're targeting 172, and then it obviously gets better if we break 172. But to start off, it's a 1-to-1 risk reward, so it's not that great. 1-to-1 risk reward is obviously the lowest I would go. But yeah, it's all about 173.50. Now, what's going to be interesting is kind of the environment of when Apple is going to break 173.50, and the environment in the overall market, and obviously the price action with Apple is really going to decide whether we go long or whether we go short off of 173.50. Because if we have Apple break 173.50, but the overall market is holding, the likelihood of Apple bouncing off of that key support is fairly large, right? So that's kind of what I'm going to be keeping an eye on, is how the overall market is trading. Now, obviously, if we have overall downside momentum with the broader market and Apple fails at 173.50, then puts are going to be in play, right? But if the market's holding and the market is trying to base, but Apple breaks 173.50, again, I would look to go long, especially if we see that break of 173.50, a lot of volume coming through, and then it quickly reclaims that support, and better yet, closes above it on the daily. I definitely would consider going long. So really pay attention to that level. I need to see a test of 173.50 before really considering, any sort of a trade. I have to see that print of 173.50 first. Okay. All right. Now Microsoft here. So Microsoft is a inside day, and we're approaching again that low from August, right? And this low from August is 311.55. Okay. So my main focus ultimately is 316.50 on Microsoft. If we fail at 316.50, then I would look to go short, targeting 315 and then mainly that low of 311.55 there. Okay. Now, if Microsoft ends up breaking 316.50, but we get a quick reclaim of that support, and we end up reclaiming 320, then I would look to go long. I'm using 320 as kind of confirmation, or a reclaim of 320 as confirmation of a move off of 316.50 for a bounce. So I do want to see a test at 316.50 first before any sort of a trade is made. But we had a pretty strong day there on Thursday. We closed as a doji, strong volume came through, red or abnormal volume came through. So I'm not surprised that, Friday was an inside day on this name. So Monday, Tuesday are going to be very important to see where this goes and how this trades. But if we hold through 1650, I do like it for a short-term bounce, especially if we can reclaim that 320 level. Okay. All right. So that's pretty much it in terms of what I'm looking for, but I will cover a couple names like Amazon, because I know there's going to be questions about this one. Amazon honestly is kind of in a limbo area. I don't see a great trade on this, so I'll pay attention to it, but it's kind of in my opinion, it's kind of in a wacky zone. And even looking at the weekly, it's a little messy, so I don't really see a great setup on that one. And then AMD here, I am going to pay close attention to AMD because this is just starting to break down 100 again, and it's been extremely weak. So I do think AMD can get a back test of 100. Whether or not we're going to get a reclaim is a different story, but I do think we can see a back test of 100 before a larger move happens, whether it's to the upside or whether it's to the downside. So I want to keep an eye on 98 this week for AMD. If we do get the reclaim of 98, then I like calls for a move up into 100, and then I would look to short, and play puts off of 100 if we do fail to reclaim that level. So definitely something I'm looking at. And right now I'll put a couple of alerts, 97 and 97.50. Okay. Let's take another look. Disney, not much. Cat's another name I'm going to watch for a play off of 270 at some point this week. I do think we'll see a 270 test, but Cat's been one of those names that's been holding up very well since its earnings report back on August 1st. So for the whole month, it's been holding very, very well. Actually, almost 2 months now, been holding really, really well. So 270 is that main support I'm going to pay attention to. If we fail at 270, then I do think we see a gap fill at 265, so potentially 5 points of downside there under 270. Looking at the weekly, we are making lower highs here, and this could be a lower low breakdown. Again, targeting about 265 there. So we'll pay close attention to 270, have a couple of alerts there. Shop, I looked at Shop earlier today, really kind of in no man's land for the most part. I don't really like Shop that much. Yeah, nothing great. And NVIDIA, it's mainly about 400. I don't see a great trade in this range right now. I do think we see 400 at some point in the coming weeks. Could be this week, but we'll look for a trade at 400, whether it's calls or whether it's puts. But if 400 fails, I do think we can at least get back into 380. Boeing setting up for 192. Okay. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Google, I liked Google a lot for calls, but it really needs to get back 132 before any sort of consideration. I like it over 132, but right now it's kind of in no man's land. And then it needs like 128 for downside, so it's back in this chop zone of 132 to 128. So anything in that area, I'm not really interested in. And then Home Depot, not really interested in anything until it sees 300 again. CRM, yeah. So that's primarily it. Pretty short list for the week ahead, but I think with the list that we have, we definitely will be able to find a lot of setups and a lot of price action that we can focus on. And I think less is more um, in the next, coming weeks to potentially months. So let's cover SPY and QQQ, which is really another main focus of mine this week. So SPY is coming back into a massive support zone of 430 to 432. So ultimately, pretty simple approach to the week ahead. Um, so if SPY ends up holding 430 to 432, I do think we can see a short-term bounce, at least back up into 436. Potentially, we can fill this gap on the daily at 438. So I like it, for calls above 430 to 432. But if this fails, if 430 fails, the next major support is 420, right? Like we really don't have much support. We will find some at around 425 just because it is a psychological area, but we definitely do have 10 points of potential downside if we fail at this key support. Um, and looking at the weekly, right, obviously extremely weak with the close right under that weekly low of August 14th, right? And this weekly high of August 15th of 2022, right? So we're breaking back under these key levels. So 430 really is the line in the sand for this week. And looking at the weekly chart, like I said, there really isn't much support until 420. So we could potentially see a 10-point, move to the downside if 430 fails. So for a lot of the bounce plays that we're looking at, SPY has to hold 430. If we're under 430, then I have no interest in playing bounces whatsoever, right? I'll be looking to the downside. I'll be looking to short intraday pops, right? Full on bear mode for the most part. But if 430 holds and we can base around 430, reclaim 432, then I do think we can see a short bounce to the upside. And then at some point in the middle of the week, right, we could potentially look for a fade. I wouldn't look for a massive bounce. It'd probably be 2 days, 3 days at most that I'd be looking for, and then start to potentially fade that bounce. Okay, so my game plan early on in the week with SPY is to see if we can hold 430 to 432. If we can, then to start the week off, I would look to be a little bit bullish, playing the bounces, playing the relative strength names, and then potentially on Wednesday or Thursday, start looking for a fade. But if 430 fails, like I said, then we'll be focusing on puts and shorting the pops on the daily and intraday. Okay, until price action tells us otherwise, right? And right now, objectively, price action is telling us more downside. But with the move we got last week, I do think we can see a little bit of short covering, potentially some buyers at 430 to give us a short-term bounce. But if they fail, obviously puts will be in play. Okay, and then QQQ, similar situation with 357. Now with QQQ, 357 to 355 is that key support zone. And if we fail at 355, 355 really being kind of the line in the sand there, I do think we see 350, and then under 350 and 348, we don't have much support until like 340. Okay, so QQQ has a little bit of a fight ahead of it before really kind of breaking down here. 350 to 348 being the next key support zone. But if that fails, I think we go back to 340. Okay. So for this week, same kind of concept with SPY. If QQQ holds 357 to 355, then I think we can see a short-term bounce. But if that support range fails, puts, right? Puts will be the main focus. So we'll see where we're at tomorrow morning. Like I said at the beginning of the video, we don't have a ton of economic data to really move the markets this week like we had last week with FOMC. So I do think it'll be, a bit of a slower week, really focused more on price action, and keeping, our trades 1 to 2 trades a day, right, and keeping it fairly light because I do think it can be a bit trickier from here on out. So yeah, we'll see where we're at tomorrow morning to start the week off. So that's it for today's video. Want to keep it around 20 minutes. If you do have any questions, let me know. But I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their weekend, and I'll talk to y'all tomorrow. Take care.